Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.
Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Dan Moulthrop. I'm the chief executive here. I'm also a proud member, and it's really distinctly an honor and a privilege and a pleasure to introduce you to our speaker today, Nancy Kramer. She is the founder and chairman of Resource Ammirati and chief evangelist at IBM iX. The iX stands for Interactive Experience, I've recently learned. Ms. Kramer is with us today as part of our Business Leaders series. That's a series that helps us learn from leaders who innovate, who push boundaries, who identify new industries and trends, and transform the way we interact with products, with one another, and with the world around us. As the founder of the digital marketing company, Resource Ammirati, Ms. Kramer's more than 30 years of experience in marketing and advertising coincides with some of the great technological advances of our time, a feat recognized by Advertising Age when it added her name to its list of the 100 most influential women in advertising in 2012. Now, we want you to hear Ms. Kramer's background and her story, mostly from her, but I'm going to share a little bit, just a little bit. After turning down a job with MTV a long time ago, Ms. Kramer founded Resource Ammirati in Columbus, Ohio in 1981. And over the next 3 decades, she built Resource Ammirati into one of the country's largest independent woman-owned marketing companies by securing such high-profile clients as Apple, Victoria's Secret, P&G, Birchbox, and Nestle, among others. And in addition to its renown in the industry, under Ms. Kramer's leadership, Resource Ammirati also became one of the top places to work in the country by promoting equity and an open, collaborative culture where all employees feel valued. In 2006, she announced the creation of REEF, the Resource Employee Equity Fund, in which every employee is a shareholder in each of Resource's publicly traded clients. 2 years later, in 2008, Resource Ammirati was named one of the top small workplaces by the Wall Street Journal. Earlier this year, in a surprising twist, which you'll understand later why it's a surprising twist, Resource Ammirati was the first digital marketing creative agency acquired by IBM as part of its Interactive Experience division, as I said, known as IBM iX. It's now the world's largest design, digital, and cognitive consultancy. Ms. Kramer remains chairman of Resource Ammirati and took on the new role as chief evangelist of IBM iX in August. And on a personal note, I would like to just note that Nancy Kramer, who all of you who know her are like, why is he saying Nancy Kramer? Why is he saying Miss Kramer? Why doesn't he just call her what everybody calls her, which is Kramer? Kramer's a friend, and when I first took this job in 2013, and I thought of the kinds of people who I want to get to this stage sometime, she was very close to the top of the list. So it's a real pleasure to have you here, Kramer. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm City Club welcome, please, for my friend, our friend, Nancy Kramer.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to be here. The room is filled with a lot of friends and family, and it's really an honor to be here. I was here one other time, and I don't think that I fully appreciated the history of the City Club. And prior to lunch, Dan was sharing with me some of that history, and it is just an incredible asset to this community. And I am very honored and humbled to be here, so thank you so much for the invitation. You know, there's some pretty big names up on the screen, Apple and IBM, and you listen to some of this stuff that Dan talked about and you think, wow, that's pretty cool, and I feel so fortunate to have led the life that I have. But I'm going to talk to you today from a bit more of a personal angle, because I think sometimes we think, you know, wow, this person, they've got it all going on and all this stuff. And the truth is, just like every one of us, I have my challenges just like everyone else. And I find that when we can share those challenges with each other and be more honest about what's going on the inside of us that, you know, may not be reflected on the outside, that it's a more powerful experience. So I'm going to take a little bit more of a personal journey today. And one of my dear friends, and actually the idea of creating the title of evangelist came from one of my friends from Apple, Guy Kawasaki, who was Apple's chief evangelist back in 1983 when we were introducing the Macintosh, and we needed to get someone to go around to all the software companies to evangelize the Macintosh and try to get them to write software to support the Macintosh. So that idea for evangelist came from my friend Guy Kawasaki, and one of his slick moves in every one of his presentations is to always say, this is what I'm going to talk about. So if you're really bored, you know where I am on the spectrum. I'm going to hit 6 topics. I'm going to talk about where I came from. I'm going to talk about Africa. I'm going to talk about picking partners. I'm going to, of course, talk about Apple. I'm going to talk about the perfect storm and my next chapter. So if at any point you're bored, you know, thank God, she's almost at the end. So where I came from literally, so I am a lifelong resident of Columbus, Ohio. This is the house that I lived in growing up at 1461 Kennard Road, for anyone that is familiar with Columbus. It's on the east side, right off of Livingston Avenue. And when I would walk home from Christ the King School every day, I would walk into the house, and it was you can see, very small house. And inevitably, I would find my mother sitting at the kitchen table, and she would be drinking a Coke out of those like cool little Coke bottle, you know, those little bottle glasses of Coke, and she would be smoking a cigarette, and she would be on the phone with her mother. And I would say to her, and here's my mom, I would say to her, what'd you do today? Because I just, you know, I would find her every day in this place, and she would be like, well, I ironed the sheets, or, I mean, that's when you iron sheets, and you ironed underwear, and you washed the windows every week, and all kinds of things that are lost arts on some level. But actually, I found what she was doing really boring, frankly, and I would tell her that, and I'm sure she just wanted to smack me, but I was actually in that moment that I decided that I wanted to explore a world outside of the world that my mother lived in. And so I think it was at that point that I decided that I would be in the working world. And although my mother did not role model that for me, that was a decision I think I made super subconsciously very early on. But, you know, my mom also, there's a couple people here who knew my mom. She was quite a character and bigger than life and had a great sense of humor. She also had a little bit of a mean streak. And when I was young, she used to say to me, she and my brother used to say to me, you know, Nancy, you are a dumb blonde, and let's hope that you find someone to marry you who's going to take care of you. So hold that thought, because that was a seed planted in me at a very young age that had a great impact on my life. On the other hand, my dad, here's a picture of my dad. He served in both World War II and Korea, and was in sales for Keebler cookies. I used to tell everyone my dad was a Keebler elf and we lived in a tree, which of course we did not, but I loved my dad's work. And when my dad would take me to his office, I would go play on the adding machines, and my brother and I would roll each other up and down the linoleum-lined hallways on those like caster wheel chairs, and just loved it. My dad would put us on the conveyor belt in the distribution center and send us down. It was so much fun. We had so many cookies at our house all the time. I loved going to work with my dad. And every now and again, my father would actually allow me to go to the grocery store, where he would be stocking the shelves with Keebler cookies and crackers and, you know, merchandising back when people did that. And my dad had taught me, and I think this is because he was in both World War II and Korea, that Nabisco, who was the maker of Oreo cookies, was the enemy. So that was the enemy in our house. And he said that Oreo cookies were actually poisonous and young kids shouldn't eat them. And being the loving daughter that I was, I believed him. I literally was probably almost 30 years old before I ate an Oreo cookie. I just could not bring myself to it. So sometimes I would go with my dad to the grocery store and be stocking the shelves, and when my dad would be distracted, I would go to where the Oreo cookies were in the aisle, and I would stick my fingers and punch holes in the Oreo cookie packages because I thought I was helping my dad. I thought, well, if they're broken, no one's going to buy them, and then they'll buy my dad's cookies, and it'll be much better. And you know, I think my dad saw me doing it, but he never acknowledged it. You know, he kind of like looked at me out the side of my eye, out of his eye, and anyway, so you know, talk about unconditional love. But I mean, not that I am professing that people should destroy public property, but I think that it's just an interesting story how much influence our parents have over us. And my dad was a very, very special person. This is, let me just go back here. You know, you know, as I said, my experience with my mom really kind of drove me to know that I wanted a different role for my life and a different life than my mom had experienced, and a less traditional experience. One of the things that I used to do that also influenced me greatly was that I spent a lot of time in the summer at the library. I lived in a house that had no air conditioning, and to this day I'm someone who really doesn't like the heat. In the summer in Ohio, I actually go out to the North New England Cape because I find Ohio too hot for the summer. And so to escape the summer humidity, I used to go to our local library, and I would spread out on the linoleum floor, second use of linoleum in one talk. Yeah, random things that come out, yeah. And I would read books about all kinds of places outside of Columbus. And I found myself really being drawn to books about Africa. I loved animals, and this book in particular was one that I probably read 900 times, Born Free, which was about a woman who lived in Africa who took care of lions. And I just thought this was the coolest thing that I had ever heard. And so I became a bit obsessed and, you know, kind of started wearing a lot of khaki, and there was a show at that time growing up. There was a show called Daktari, which actually stands for doctor in Swahili, and I would, every Sunday night or whenever it was on, I'd like be in front of the television watching it. So I became a little bit obsessed about Africa. Again, I think because it was so far away from Columbus, it was almost like the opposite side of the earth. And because of my love of animals. And so when I went to school at Ohio State, and I'm a first-generation college graduate, my father didn't even graduate from high school. My family was unable to provide for me to go to school, and so I paid for my way through college by working at Kroger as a cashier. And worked full-time and went to school full-time at Ohio State at a time when I thought the choices for college were Ohio State, Ohio State, or Ohio State. But anyway, I decided as my foreign language requirement to take Swahili as my foreign language requirement. Also something that my parents just thought was great. I just wanted to learn more about Africa. And through that experience, through my Swahili teacher, he really encouraged me to go visit Africa. So when I graduated from school at Ohio State, I mean, this is 1977. Again, young women didn't just go off to Kenya by themselves, not on a tour, but I did. And this is the picture of me, and in the only picture that I have of myself in Africa. And when I landed in Nairobi, I really felt at home. I felt very much at peace. I'm not sure if I was a lion in a previous life or what it was, but I felt a real connection to Africa. I remember coming back to Columbus was a bit of a downer. Here I'd traveled all over the world, and Columbus seemed so unglamorous. And so this trip is something that influenced my life significantly. The photos that I took while I was there really are on the walls of my conference room in my office, because this is an inspiration to me, because I think it was at this point in my life that I realized when you really dream about something, you actually have the ability to make it happen, and that anything is possible. And so at a very young age, to think about dreaming about going to Africa and thinking about it all those years and then actually making it happen, that underscored that for me. But when I arrived back in Columbus, I went to the home that you saw here and was faced with my invitations to my wedding that was happening that December. And waiting for me to address. And I knew then that I didn't really want to get married, but I felt kind of trapped, and it was back to those seeds that were planted in me as a young girl. And I just thought, I've got to, suck this up and make it happen. I was, brought up in a very strict Catholic household, and so, he's a fabulous, wonderful, caring man. It just wasn't the right thing for me. And of course, with every perhaps challenging situation, there's always a silver lining. And for me, my silver lining is really the loves of my life are my 3 children, one of whom is here today. Just picked her up from the airport here in Cleveland, in from New York. So I love being a mom. Being a mom is by far the most rewarding role of all the roles that I have in my life. And I have 3 really fabulous children, and then 3 fabulous stepchildren, who is part of the next story. So now we're at point 3, if you're bored, picking partners. Sheryl Sandberg said in her book, Lean In, that one of the most important decisions a woman can make is who she picks to be her partner. And if you are a person who, I would say for anyone, I don't think it's just men, I think it's women, for anyone to pick a person who can be shoulder to shoulder with you, who really pushes you and inspires you and really holds you up is, I think, the key to unlocking ourselves, perhaps. At least for me, it was. I learned a lot about what I wanted or didn't want in my first partner, and in my second marriage to Christopher Celeste, who is here today and a fellow Clevelander. I really have a partner who loves me unconditionally. If it weren't for Christopher, I wouldn't be telling my story in the way that I tell it. He is just an amazing partner to me, and so the 6 of us, we have 3 children. It is the Brady Bunch. We have 2 children that are 28, 2 children that are 26, and 2 children that are 23. And the year all 5 were in college was a really tough year. But I cannot underscore enough the importance of picking partners and how that has the ability to unlock us as individuals. So in many ways, my first client for my business, now we're on point 4, Apple. Apple was a partner for me. Not only my first client, but of course the Apple was personified by Steve Jobs, its founder. I fell in love with Apple. I love the idea of the notion that Apple was in the business of democratizing information. And for a young kid from Columbus, Ohio, who really wanted to experience the world, the ability to democratize information and take that in was really exciting to me. And so, just a little bit of history. I started the business in '81, as Dan mentioned, and I worked in this area of the country for Apple doing marketing and advertising. It was to be a regional kind of agency for Apple, and after a few months, Apple saw what I was doing had a positive impact on their revenue, so they asked me to come visit their corporate offices in Cupertino, and I started working with them on a national basis. And so our role was to help them sell their product into the retail channel and how to sell it through to the end user. So people that were buying personal computers, again, everybody didn't have a personal computer back in the early 80s, and it was a very new idea. I was on the launch team of the Macintosh. I was there when Steve Jobs introduced the 1984 commercial to all of the people in the business in October of '83. It was a rock star experience, one that I will never forget. I was on the launch of what was called desktop publishing, which, Apple created this like crazy thing. I see nods. I'm so happy to see heads nodding because like my kids are like, Mom, no clue, pre-internet. But but the idea of taking a computer and hooking it up to a laser printer was like, woo, Star Trek. I mean, like super, like weird. Where is it going to explode? What's going to happen? But it was just such an incredible experience. And to have the opportunity to work alongside of Steve, he influenced me in so many different ways. I'll never forget where I was when I learned that he had passed away. I was hosting a client event in Ohio Stadium, literally standing on the 50-yard line on a beautiful, beautiful October evening, and my friend came over to tell me that Steve had passed, and I just burst into tears because if it weren't for Steve Jobs, if it weren't for his vision, the story that I'm telling you today would be very different. It would not be the story, it would not be the life that I've experienced. And we worked with Apple for the better part of 2 decades, and then had the opportunity to work with a lot of other technology companies. And then when the internet became commercialized in the mid-90s, we started working with a lot of other companies that were trying to figure out how to go online. So really just an amazing, amazing experience. So now we're going to go into the dark period, which is why the screen is black. So fast forward about 2 decades and our business was doing extremely well. We created a commercial we created the very first e-commerce offering for Victoria's Secret. We created a commercial that was in the Super Bowl, broadcasting their webcast of their fashion show, which notoriously crashed the internet. It was marketing event of the year. It was memorialized in a time capsule at MIT. We had all this business. The dot-com bubble was still bubbling. And it was really just, the business was doing extraordinarily well. On the other hand, I personally was not doing very well. I might look on the outside like it was all, unicorns and rainbows, but what was going on inside of me was undeniably not unicorns and rainbows. I was hospitalized on a couple of occasions because of panic attacks and feeling like I was having a heart attack. I was on antidepressant medication, really because my relationship and my marriage was just not aligning with what I wanted in my life, and I was having a really hard time reconciling that. Simultaneous with that, and why this is called the perfect storm, the dot-com bubble happened, and my former husband moved out of the home. The children stayed with me, our 3 children, and the dot-com bubble burst. And in the span of 90 days, our business plummeted by 70%. And this is anybody in business knows this is a very, very challenging thing to navigate. And so it was very dark. We had to lay people off. We had never laid anyone off. You heard that, we had been named one of the best places to work in the country. I was really proud of the fact that we'd always been very fiscally sound with the way that we managed the business. But this dot-com bubble bursting, clients went away overnight, left us with millions of dollars of unpaid bill. I mean, it was just really, really challenging. But to be going through a divorce simultaneous with that was really, really challenging. And so we merged with another company, with a couple of other companies to survive, frankly. And it was almost doomed from the beginning, because I think probably because it was done under duress. And so 6 months into a merged entity, I needed to figure out how to negotiate myself out of this merged entity. And so in order for me to acquire back the company that I had put into this business, I needed to come up with $5.4 million. And I had to give up all my equity in the business. It's what one might call, for those who are football fans, the Hail Mary pass. And so I wasn't sure what was going to happen. I was interviewing for jobs. The children were completely financially dependent on me. And so I wasn't really sure what was going to happen. But I successfully negotiated an option to buy out the business. And after the first year, the profits of the first year paid for half. And then a very, very, very dear friend personally guaranteed a line of credit for us to buy the other half of the business back. And at that point, I helped this person, a woman, my business partner, Kelly Mooney, really helped me figure out how to move the business forward. And the day that we closed on making our last payment to the bank from this thing that we bought ourselves out of, the largest digital marketing agency in the country called us that day wanting to acquire us. And we said, "You have no idea how poor your timing is." And we said no. And so over the past 15 years, the business has grown to 11 times the size it was at the time that we bought it out. And so we've had just a tremendous success. But Kelly and I both really had decided that we needed to figure out what the next chapter was going to be. We had decided this wasn't going to be a family business. We had decided that, hearing from our clients, we needed to have more deeper technology experience. We needed more global reach. And we were independent, and at the time, about a $70 million business. With about 350 people. And so, it was the largest independent in the country, but we really felt like we needed to think about what's next for the business. And so we went on a quest and decided to look at what our options might be. And in September of 2015, I had my very first meeting with IBM. Now, let me just share with you that Steve Jobs beat into our head that IBM was the moral enemy of everything in the computer industry. There's a very famous picture of Steve in front of the IBM logo in New York, giving it the finger, for those of you that would like to look it up. And so, as I'm sitting across the table from these folks from IBM, I said, "You have no idea how ironic it is for me to be sitting here with you, actually talking to you about acquiring our business." But in an effort to kind of reoccurring theme here, don't judge a book by its cover, what I learned was really remarkable. I actually fell in love with IBM. This is a 105-year-old technology company that has transformed itself time and time again. People are often surprised that this $80 billion business, 70% of its revenue now is from services. It's an extraordinary story. And for somebody that prides myself in creating an environment where people are valued and highly valued, the people practices that IBM has demonstrated in these 105 years were also something that truly resonated with me. IBM hired its first disabled person in 1914. It's had equal pay for women as a standard policy since 1933. It has had sexual non-discrimination policy since 1984. And in the early 2000s, IBM actually has a benefit for transgender associates that will allow them to have reconstructive surgery. I mean, we are talking incredible progressive people practices, which was something that was really important to me. From a technology side, IBM for the last 20-some years running has received more patents than any other company in the world. Last year, over 7,300, I think, more than Google, Intel, and Microsoft combined. I mean, we are talking a very, very innovative company. And something that was really personal to me was just a commitment to community. My biggest kind of fear as a founder of a business is that I had created this business, it's been vibrant, certainly has had its ups and downs over 35 years, but to watch it disappear overnight, would be my biggest nightmare. So how was I going to put it in the hands of someone or something that would allow, not only for it to, continue to grow, but actually provide opportunities that our associates never thought possible? And with IBM, we found that. So earlier this year, we announced this marriage, and it has been really an extraordinary experience. And I wasn't really sure what I was personally going to do as this transaction was happening. And so, as I said in the beginning, I was inspired by Guy Kawasaki and his title of evangelist. And so I said to IBM, they're like, "We'll take whatever you want to do for us, Nancy. It's great." And so it's just been really, really a fabulous ride. But I'm going to read something to you because, again, kind of with the theme that we're always dealing with these kind of fears that we have inside of us and trying to work to overcome them. At least I am. And I have a passage from my journal that's called Being Scared that I wrote on March 11th, 2016, when I was having kind of a little bit of an emotional day. I said, less than 30 days ago, I closed the deal selling the business to IBM. What an incredible journey it has been. Signed the LOI on December 23rd. Massive due diligence questions arrived on December 24th. 900 million people from IBM descending on us in early January, and it's just been nonstop since then. No one thought we could pull it off, but we did. Stress, speech of my life, which was to all of our associates about this, that Christopher and I crafted together. Without him, none of this would happen. I've loved IBM. I've fallen in love with IBM like I did with Africa and with Apple. But the emotions today are overwhelming me. I've been doing this for 35 years. Who am I now? What am I? What's next? I felt like I had control over so many things, even though I didn't really have control over anything. I felt as though I did. Now I have control over nothing. Am I valued? Will I ever write this freaking book? Will anyone read it? I have these triggers from my childhood, fear of not being safe, being judged. Maybe one day I can talk about if it's helpful to some people. Are you reading this? Is it helpful to you? I know I should feel safe. Sometimes knowing you should feel safe really sucks when you don't feel safe because you just feel stupid for not feeling the way you know you're supposed to feel. So obviously a very raw moment, a bit of a panic moment when a whole host of things were changing around me and I really wasn't sure what my future was going to be. But I think I wanted to share that with you because, despite what the accolades are or, what the different awards are, all that sort of thing, I struggle with this. I'm sure I have yet to meet anyone who hasn't struggled with something. And as Christopher and I were driving up here this morning, we were talking about the passing of John Glenn. And that when Christopher recently spoke to him, he had said to him, John, you are an incredibly fearless person. And he said, I'm not fearless. I'm courageous. I overcome my fear. And so I've worked to try to overcome my fear of feeling stupid, my fear of not being safe, and I continue to struggle with it. And so I hope by me sharing this story with you, it will open up something with you and maybe encourage you to share with someone that will help open you up and perhaps help you write your own story. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to do a real quick thing. Okay?
Oh, okay.
That was fun. Thank you for your candor and your honesty. Today we're enjoying a Friday Forum with Nancy Kramer, founder and chairman of Resource Ammirati, an IBM company. She's also chief evangelist at IBM iX. And we're about to begin the audience Q&A. Before we do, if you're interested, if you're listening on the radio or the stream, and you want to see that picture of Steve Jobs, just search Twitter for the hashtag CityClub, and you will find my tweet. So we're about to begin the Q&A. We welcome questions from all of you, City Club members, guests, students, those of you joining us via our radio broadcast or webcast or our live simulcast at the Parma Snow branch of the Cuyahoga County Public Library. I did mention Twitter. If you'd like to tweet a question, please tweet it at the City Club, and our staff will work it into the program. And we do want to remind you that your questions should be brief and to the point. Holding our microphones today are Content Associate Teddy Eisenberg and Director of Programming Stephanie Jansky. Do we have our first question?
You clearly have been moved by some men in your life, beginning with your father, who set strong examples. And we have much that we know about Steve Jobs, and we've learned some about your father, but you are an evangelist. That's really a very good description of the way you present. So I would like to hear you say something about your relationship with Guy Kawasaki and how the concept of being an evangelist was modeled and ended up being something that you adopted.
Sure. Well, I had the privilege of working with Guy's wife, Beth, She was in the marketing department at Apple, and I actually had the privilege of watching the courtship unfold, which was just fabulous. Beth was dating someone else, and Guy was pursuing her greatly. And it was he did a really slick move. He actually, she was trying to decide whether to go out with Guy or this other person, and he sent her a pair of shoes, like really cool, like beautiful black suede pumps, and with some like great note about being in her shoes or something like that. It was amazing. It was amazing. And so then the rest is history, and now they have 4 children, and they're lovely. But as I said, this notion of evangelism is not an uncommon notion in the technology world, where you're creating an ecosystem of partners to bring your concepts to the world. And so that's what evangelism is about, is this, how can we all work together for the greater good, if you will. There's so much in the technology space which inspires me about advancing human condition, which Ginny Rometty, and by the way, I didn't mention that it's not ironic that IBM is run by a woman, where we were very excited about that. And we think we are the first female-owned business that IBM has ever acquired, which is also really a great thing to have happened. But so this notion of evangelism really comes from spreading the gospel, the concepts for the greater good of the entire effort, if you will, in the ecosystem that's required. In some places, IBM, you're working with a competitor who's also an ally, depending on what the context is. And so how to operate in that kind of an ecosystem is really what evangelism is about. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Hi, Nancy. My name's Nicole Rosario, and I've just started a new marketing and event planning business, and I'm curious to know what advice you'd give for me in this first year in terms of getting off on the right foot.
Oh my gosh. Well, I would say number one is having the courage, back to John Glenn, having the courage to trust your gut. Whenever I allow all the other voices around me to influence me and get me off my path, and perhaps not trusting my instinct enough because I felt like I didn't know, so often then I took the wrong path. And so having the courage to trust your instincts, listen to your heart inside, listen to what you know already would be the number one thing that I tell to people in your situation.
I guess I should call you Kramer.
Just
Respectfully.
For the record, I've been called that since middle school, so way before Seinfeld or any of that. And I don't feel like I really look like Kramer from Seinfeld, but just for the record.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, this is a very inspiring presentation, and I wanted to ask you about leadership. And at what point that you were talking a lot about your company you had and how it valued your employees and how you chose IBM in part because of how it values its employees. Mm-hmm. At what point did you determine that was fundamental to your business, or is that something you intrinsically had when you started your business? You're like, this is the kind of leader I'm going to be.
Well, that's a great question, and thank you so much for that, because for the first, I would say, 10 years of the business, like any entrepreneur, you just are heads down trying to build the business and, meet payroll. And every time we'd hire someone, I'd think, there's another bird in the nest and I have to get the worms to feed them. And I literally had that visual in my head every time we hired someone. And I took great, it's a lot of responsibility, people's livelihoods. And so it was when I first read Jim Collins' book, Built to Last. So I'm a graduate of Ohio State. I did not go to graduate school. And so, as I like to say, there's been a lot of on-the-job learning. And reading his book, Built to Last, which is about how companies are successful over multiple decades, multiple generations. And the core that he studied really showed that if a company has a well-articulated core purpose, why does it exist? Why does this company exist? If it went away, what would be missing? So why does this company exist? And then what are the core values of the business? And so we actually started asking ourselves, what is our core purpose? What are our core values? Which then ended up being something that we articulated and really worked on together as a company. They were there, but they needed to be, I called it the little bit of an archaeological dig, trying to figure out what was there, what are the artifacts that are there that we're not seeing. And so we have for a great number of years, we have had a very specifically articulated core purpose, which really relates to my personal kind of philosophical model of life about making anything possible, and specific core values. And so we celebrate that in our business every year. We have our associates that are nominated for, it's a peer-nominated program where every single person can nominate their peer who they think best exemplifies our core values. They receive fabulous prizes and money and are up on stage and cry, and it's really fun. It's over 25 years, I think we've been doing it. And when I looked at IBM's core purpose and their core values, they have 3 core values, we have 3 core values. Their purpose and our purpose were almost identical. I mean, this was pretty much after I had made the decision, but it was almost like a validation that this was the right course. But I didn't have an instrument, I didn't know what that even meant, but I was really inspired by Jim Collins and his whole framework that he mapped out in Built to Last. It was incredibly influential and is still the framework that we use to run the business today.
Thank you, Ms. Kramer. Very simple question. We know a lot about Steve Jobs and how he was and his personality. Could you tell us a little bit about Steve Wozniak?
Well, sure. He is, I would call him WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. And he is just an incredibly curious individual, very childlike, always looking at what's next, super inspired and passionate about technology advances, just really marches to his own drummer. Being in a large corporation, in a publicly traded company like Apple really wasn't his thing. So, he's part of the DNA of Apple, but a very different person from Steve, which I think is a reason that they made good partners. Steve Wozniak is not a marketer. He's not a super strong communicator. And he has a different kind of vision than Steve Jobs.
Hi, Kramer.
Hi, Mike.
I wanted to get your take on, you've been an amazing businesswoman, but I've had the chance to get to know you personally. I know you're also an awesome mom and an awesome wife, and I'm at the point now where I'd love to be successful in business. I have my own company now, but I also have 2 young children. Mm-hmm. And so I was just wondering advice from you on how to not only be, the best kind of entrepreneur, but also still be that awesome dad too.
Oh, well, Mike, thank you. You're very kind. I think that in the 2000, when the dot-com bubble was bursting and the perfect storm was happening, I'd had these health issues. It was a bit of a wake-up call to me. And, as I said, being a mom is my favorite role of all my roles. And I was doing a lot of traveling. I had to go to California pretty much every other week. I think I've made like 400 and some odd round trips to California. But I really decided that I needed to make a change. And I really put my kids first. And I didn't even realize it at the time. And people have said, oh yeah, people knew, you just can't. If Kramer's kids have got a sporting event or a play to go to, you're not going to get her at that thing. I started putting my kids first. I put their calendar on my calendar every school year. And everything I did was planned around their activities. So that was kind of like a strategy that I employed. I didn't want to be an absent mother, and I saw other mothers being absent. And so sometimes you learn what you don't want to do by watching others as much as you learn what you do want to do. And so I feel like I was there. I feel very close to all of my children, but making their schedule my schedule, and I think was the key. And then I tried to have as many meals at home and would on Sundays plan, here's what we're going to have to eat this week. And I would post it in our kitchen on a Post-it note, because if I didn't, my son would call me at 5 o'clock saying, "What's for dinner, Mom?" And if he was in a really good mood, he'd say, "How was your day?" Before asking what was for dinner. But I tried to have as many family meals at home and tried to have, meaningful conversations around their day. And so those were the two things that I'd say. They're simple, but I think meaningful looking back.
It's Kate Volzer. I'm the CEO of a software startup here in Cleveland. As a leader of a company, you make a lot of decisions often, and I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit about the best decision from in a business standpoint that you've made in your career.
Oh, no pressure. Oh, geez, I think probably just starting having the courage to start a business. I mean, I was 20, I had just turned 26 years old. I had no idea. I didn't even know what an entrepreneur was. Back in 1981, I don't think we even had that word in the vocabulary. And so I would say my life would have just taken on a completely different trajectory had I not decided, I thought I was in media sales for a radio station actually in Columbus. And I thought, well, if it doesn't work out, I can always go back into media sales. I literally thought that. And so, here I am 35 years later. But I would say that was probably a really important point, that making that decision and having the courage to just jump into that when I had absolutely zero idea what I was doing. Zero. I'm sure you know a lot more than I'm sure you do.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Neundorfer, and first I wanted to thank you so much for this talk. I really appreciated your candidness and honesty, particularly sharing your journal entry. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the role of journaling and other tools that you have used to navigate challenges and celebrate accomplishments throughout your career and life.
Well, I don't journal as often as I wish I did. I struggle with that, and I beat myself up about it. It's like, oh, I didn't journal today. Oh, I suck. I literally think that to myself. And so it's a very powerful thing. I was actually a journalism major in college, and so writing is very therapeutic and is very fulfilling on a lot of levels. And I need to do it more. But I think that throughout the deal, it's helpful at trying to work out how you really feel about things. I mean, to be perfectly candid, for a long time, 20 years ago, I didn't feel comfortable journaling because I was afraid somebody was going to read it. It's kind of like when you have a diary and you're afraid your mom's going to read something that you don't want her to see, which happened to me. So that was actually... So anyway, so that was really a traumatic experience, quite frankly. So that probably kind of curved my desire to write much after that, just for the fear of the consequences of somebody reading something that you don't want them to read. But I don't have that fear any longer. And so it's very therapeutic. I think that it's a tool that I try to use. I wish I could use it more. Frankly, I'm a runner. I've run since I was a little kid. I literally would run around our block as a little kid. And I remember my blue Adidas, blue suede shoes. I thought they were the coolest thing in the whole world. And that has been very meditative for me. So I do that almost every day when I'm not doing yoga. So I start the day virtually every day with some sort of exercise, and that's very meditative to me. I think that I have a lot of ideas that I come up with running. I like literally people see me running down the street and I'll be talking to myself. I like literally will start talking and they probably think, who is that person? So that's probably the most important tool in my toolbox for me.
Hi, how are you? Now we know that Christopher obviously bought a pair of blue suede Adidas shoes, and that's how he...
You didn't.
Yeah. If ever there's an industry that's motivated to increase diversity, both minorities and women, it's the tech industry. And it seems like recently there's been an announcement where Facebook and others have almost given up. They've raised their hands, we're going to measure things differently. can you comment in any way that you've seen progress over the 35 years that you've been in the business?
Well, I don't think there's enough progress. This is something that I feel really strongly about, and I was very fortunate to go to a high school that was very diverse. It's kind of, probably a little bit similar to Shaker. I went to Eastmoor High School, and the population was a third African American, a third Jewish, and a third whatever. And I think that being in that environment at such a young age really helped me see the power of diversity. And it's something that I've been really I've been a promoter and advocate of diversity on every level. So a few years ago, I actually testified in front of Congress to encourage the passage of ENDA, which is the Employee Non-Discrimination Act. So the idea that somebody can actually get fired from their job because who they love, I just don't think is right. And so I try to speak out at, for those kinds of things. I have our workforce is very diverse, not as diverse from an ethnic standpoint that I would like, but certainly from a gender standpoint, it's very diverse. But we're always striving for more. And the tech industry does struggle with this. But I don't think that the solution is giving up. I don't think that that's the solution at all. I think we have to continue to move forward. And it's something that I take a lot of personal pride in. I was chair of the board of an independent school in Columbus, and when over the tenure of my time there, we increased the diversity in that school from 24% to over 40%. And this is something that I try to have my my actions speak from that standpoint. So no easy answers whatsoever, but I do not believe that giving up is the solution.
Thanks. So it sounds like you've made a lot of really good people decisions in your life. You talked about relationships with your family and your business partner and some influential clients. What about hiring decisions? How did you find, or I guess more, how did you know who to surround yourself with?
Well, that's always a really challenging situation, and we have a practice where we have people, I'm sure it's common most places, where you meet with multiple people when you're being hired at our organization, and who you meet with is very purposeful, and what that person is being asked to kind of find out from our candidates every person has a specific mission. My mission is always, Kramer, you got to see if they're a cultural fit. You got to give us a read on them from a cultural standpoint. And when we gather together as a team after we conduct an interview, the first question is this person a cultural fit? Because we've learned we've been swayed by people that have, vast, degrees that, look like they have incredible, not only education, but experience. But we've learned that if they're not a cultural fit, none of that matters. None of it matters. And so that's the first question that we ask. And if we cannot agree that the candidate is a fit from a cultural standpoint, then that's the end of the discussion, no matter who it is, no matter what their experience is, no matter what their education is. And it's not an easy, it's part art, part science, but it's really going back to those things that we value and having a specifically articulated set of core values. Does this person match up to that? And can we see demonstrated evidence that they do align with those values?
Hi.
Hi.
So look into your crystal ball, and what would you guess would be the trends moving forward from today on based on your experience in relation to product evangelism, product placement, things like that?
Well, it's a really exciting time. I think that we're at a really interesting time from a technology advancement standpoint. There's a lot of talk about artificial intelligence. and that's got a whole scary component side to it. IBM views, we don't use the word artificial intelligence, we say augmented intelligence, because the technology is there to help us all make better decisions. I don't know, and it's to help humans make better decisions that they can't simply make on their own. Those of you that maybe saw 60 Minutes a few weeks ago, where Watson is actually helping with cancer patients at UNC, there are 8,000 cancer papers published a day. A doctor cannot possibly consume 8,000 papers a day, but Watson can. And so Watson is helping doctors make better decisions for their patients. And so we're projecting that by 2020, the experiences that we have as human beings, about half of those experiences will have a cognitive thread to them. And by cognitive, we mean machine learning types of things. So I feel very proud to be a part of IBM, who I think is a company that has tremendous integrity. This is a company that does not want to own any of your data. They want you to own your data. It's an enterprise business that I think has like great integrity, and that's what was one of the appeals to me. But I think it's an exciting time, and it's kind of scary, but helping people see what the possibilities are. I've been around long enough to have seen so many of these trends and people being afraid of the next technological advancement. But we like to think that all of these advancements will continue to improve the human condition around the world, which I find very inspiring.
Close it out. Yeah, you can. You are allowed to. Yes. So before I do the whole closing thing, I just want to thank all of you here. I know many of you are here for the first time. It's great to have you. We look forward to seeing you again. Today at the City Club, we've been enjoying a Friday forum with Nancy Kramer, founder and chairman of Resource Ammirati, an IBM company. She's also chief evangelist at IBM iX. Ms. Kramer appears as part of our Business Leaders series, which is sponsored by PNC with additional support from the Freedonia Group. I feel like I should go into like a little voice, like from the Freedonia Group, Meaden and More, Falls Communications, Cleveland Magazine, Life Bank, Level 7, Ohio.net, and IdeaStream. We appreciate all of you for your support. And that brings us to the end of our program today. Thank you so much, Ms. Kramer. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Have a wonderful holiday. Our forum is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.